but you can change those people. And I think Ken has, I've even said it before, because I keep hearing it, all these motivational speakers. It's like, show me your friends and I'll show you your future.
Yes.
So, to change, look at who you want to be and then change who you surround yourself with, kind of thing. I think is one of the things. But you were right. I think that we were one of the first generations to be able to even ask that question, to even know it was a question to ask. My grandmother, I think my grandmother didn't like the way her name was spelt, so she changed that. I mean, she didn't do it legally or anything like that, but she was Madeline, spelled Madeline, but she wanted to be Madeline. But I mean, I think that's as far as she would have ever dared to change her life. There would be no other thought process to her. So then, but now 2 generations later, we are asking those questions, and God knows, her great great grandchildren are thinking well even beyond that. So thankfully.
What's interesting about that? I think it was Jim Rohn used to talk about you're the total of the 5 people that you have the most contact with, and I always found that kind of interesting. And over time, what's kind of captured a little bit of my curiosity is the fact that I don't feel you need to so much control the circle so much as the influence that circle has on you, and allow, like, if you stay true to your process and your values, that will kind of determine, like, I just had a really weird, not weird, I guess just an interesting breakthrough with a relative who I haven't been close to for decades. And we just recently had this really long conversation, and it was just, there's just been a shift in the relationship. And and it was just, all I did was stayed consistent with who I am. That was not something that connected with them until they've had a situation that's come up, and all of a sudden we're vibrating on a different frequency type thing. So there's a level of connection and interaction now that hadn't been there up to this point. So I never cut them off, or
Right.
I just stayed firm in who I choose to be in the process that I have, and they did the same. So we just weren't super connected, and it was uncomfortable, back to that words, at times, especially at family functions and stuff, but it was what it was. So, and I wonder, like, early on, I think I was confused and thought you had to cut yourself off from certain people so that they wouldn't create that negative influence, instead of having the internal strength within yourself to allow them to be present without overly, damaging who you are. And there's times where we're vulnerable, we're weak, we're fatigued, whatever. So you do have to limit those interactions because it's more than you can, like, handle, but overall it's kind of interesting. I find myself less and less worrying about the circle around me, and more just recognizing who I'm resonating with and how that's creating value in both directions. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
I think it does, and further to that point is to hear you say that you had a breakthrough after decades. That's a big deal. And
it was cool for both of us.
Well, yeah, and here's the thing. You both were walking around the world thinking that you knew everything about the other person and that there was no possibility, or whatever it was, whatever your internal.
Yeah, what's funny about that? We both 100% agree that we are 2 completely different people. And the only thing we have in common is the fact that we're part of the same family.
Yeah.
So like, there's that acknowledgement has been there all along.
Well, yeah, and did that forward the conversation? Well, not for 20 years. So the whole struggle is how do you, and family people, because things get said, and things that get said that can't get unsaid, or remembered differently than whatever they remember, And so at the end of all of that going back and forth, many opportunities for conversation don't ever get life. A thought you may have about something you want to share with a loved one, and then you predict how they're going to respond to that, and then you don't risk. And I think that's powerful and important, because I started off, kind of posing the question, are we like a river you can stick your foot in only once, but not the same river more than once? What if that's who we are? In any moment, we have the choice to do something different, and we have the choice to call somebody and ask that question. Before you ask the question, though, you might want to set up the listening just a little bit and say something like, I've had something on my mind for a while, and I want to hear your thoughts on it. And I'd like you to talk until you're done. And then when you're done, you're going to tell me you're done. And then I'm going to respond to you. And again, we're going to leave this conversation a couple of happy clams, because that's how we're going into it. And I'm really committed to generating more trust with you. And I want to get to know you in a way that I haven't known you before. And this may be an opportunity for us to build a little of that into our relationship. So whatever you say along those lines, you want to make sure that you're not setting up that usual dump that goes in two different directions, leaving both people's front yards full of cow manure and with lots of mental cleanup for days and weeks afterwards. If there's this opportunity to have a conversation that's clean, where you take a chance and you don't have to hide your emotions behind a dump truck full of manure, what would that look like? And what would that outcome be worth? And what way of being would that take, tying all of these different thoughts that we've been talking about today? Who would you have to be to even consider the possibility of taking that risk when your gut is telling you this is like such a bad idea?
I think it's kind of like, as a martial artist, you can walk into a tense situation knowing that you may need to defend yourself, but also knowing that you may be able to de-escalate the situation, And I think it's interesting. Like, I can think of I'm sure we've all had this, a relationship that didn't, had gotten toxic or whatever, and the person says, I've changed. And, so that may be true, but you have to be very vigilant about how much of who they were is still present in who they're saying they are, because they may believe that they changed, but that may not be true. So just because, we're all in a constant state of changing doesn't mean that, there's going to be resonance ever again, so it's a tricky thing. So, and I think that's, for some of, I think it was Dan Sullivan, he said he's chosen to trust what people say up front and then verify in the back end. And he said he also knows people who will not extend trust at first. They want verification first. And it's really a choice. And either way, if you want them to convince you, you may limit opening yourself to possibly new relationships, but if you trust, then you could be taken advantage of or hurt. So which way do you want to go? Either way, you have to have both skills, the ability to listen and the ability to protect, when situations don't work out, which will happen 100% of the time. It's going to happen somewhere along the line.
Yeah, getting lost in that thought.
Yeah, because the other classic one is you changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they say that, I go, yep. Yes, I did.
Oh, yeah. In the 1970s, they gave us the ultimate takeaway. It's not you, it's me,
Yeah.
That makes everything all right. I'm screwing up your entire life and all the things that we planned and talked about. They're not going on that way, but it's not you, it's me.
Yeah.
That makes it all better.
And I'm uncomfortable. It's like, you're right, I've changed and you're uncomfortable.
Yeah. And you're ugly.
We may just need to continue to go our separate ways, and it's funny with relationships too, because how often do you run into someone and you're remembering what was, either the value in it or the disconnect in it. And that creates like this natural filter for your expectation for what it could be. So it's like, you don't want to ignore that. You can't, because it informs you, but at the same time, it can't, overshadow too much what it could be in either direction, as it reinvents itself. But yeah.
Or not.
So the other
Or
really,
not, yeah.
yeah. So the corollary to that, which I discovered, I don't know, about 3 months ago, is the thought and the notion that what if people aren't remembering what happened? They're remembering an early remembrance. They're remembering the last time they remembered, which was a remembering of the previous time they remembered. And so it's kind of like along the lines of finally debunking. I guess after my cousin Vinny, we pretty much had to debunk the eyewitness testimony being the be all and the end all, and then actually, there's all these university tests and everything showing that people over time can have their entire memory changed 100% just by having other conversations where the memory is included in those conversations. So when you think about how you recall somebody or an occurrence, it's kind of fun to go and check in. My mother was she was the youngest of 7 children for 9 years, and then her younger daughter or sister was born, and so then she was the next to the youngest. And so when she was 9, she had this baby to take care of, and all of the other older kids, and some had moved out of the house because there's like a 29-year difference between the oldest and that youngest sister. So when we go back to family reunions and stuff, and some of her older sisters would tell stories about what my mother was doing, and I'd go in and I'd say, hey man, my mom used to tell a story about her dad would come home from work every single day, and he'd walk into that back door and he'd kick his foot up and he'd kick the top of the door jamb. And then be another one where he always called all of his friends, called all the kids little whitey number 1, little whitey number 2, little whitey number 3, because they all had white hair until they turned 5 or 6 years old. And so I asked my aunt Eleanor, God rest her soul, she passed last January, at a family reunion about 3 years ago. And I asked her about these stories, and she looked at me wistfully and she said, Billy, your mom had the greatest memory for things that never happened of anybody I've ever seen.
Okay.
So it really almost literally is creating these perfect memories is almost like being the Stephen King of your life, right? The stories that are there in your recollection now are the ones that you've chosen to retain. They're part of your way of being. They serve you in some manner or another. And in some cases it's comfort. In other cases it might be not wanting to to forget some feeling that you had associated with a story. But I think in the meantime, what that really said to me is, aren't we all capable of that a little bit? Aren't we all capable of remembering things in a particular fashion that seem to serve us or maybe disserve us in a particular way that is worth holding on to in our own way of thinking?
Definitely. No way around it. I don't think.
Yeah.
So what would it mean if we were fallible? And the slight that we're carrying around for 20, 30, 40 years, maybe long after they're gone,
I think that, the Byron Katie questions, is it true, is the first question. Is it really true is the second question,
And then the third
have to ask yourself twice in order to oh, wait a minute, let me think about it.
And then the third question is, does it freaking matter?
Exactly. What would your life be without having that thought is basically the...
Yeah. So the whole notion of allowing things to be present and then they will disappear because what you resist persists over time. And we do that. We use human beings as sticky notes. Oh, I see you. And I remember, the last thing you said to me, you SOB. or what a great time we had. I don't remember how we got